Sources are telling CNN that Jared Kushner met with the new leader of Hamas, and today he's expected to meet Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has rejected President Trump's 15-point peace plan for Gaza. Foreign ministers from 7 countries in the region and Indonesia all released a joint statement condemning Israel's rejection, and they're warning that it could undermine efforts to end the war and achieve a lasting political settlement. CNN's Paula Hancock is joining me from Abu Dhabi with the latest. So, Paula, what do we expect to come out of these meetings, these talks?
Well, Paolo, we understand from a diplomatic source that there will be a meeting between Jared Kushner and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu later this Monday. Now, he also will be accompanied by the Board of Peace Director, Nikolai Mladenov, and we will wait to see what exactly comes out of that meeting. But effectively, what they're trying to do is to keep this process going. The fact that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejected President Trump's 15-point peace plan means that there is effectively a stalemate at this point. So these meetings are to try and push the process forward. Now, we know on Sunday in Egypt that Jared Kushner and the delegation he is with met with the Hamas leader Khalil al-Hayya. We don't have a readout of exactly how that meeting went, but it is a rare meeting between a senior US envoy and Hamas leadership. We know that Jared Kushner, for example, last October met with Hamas. This is the only reported meeting between the US and Hamas at this level that we know of. And this is when they were trying to secure that ceasefire and the release of hostages from Gaza. So we also know that he met with President al-Sisi in Egypt. We had a readout from there where al-Sisi's office said they discussed, quote, the need for all parties to fulfill their obligations under the agreement to stop the war in the Gaza Strip. Now, at the end of last month, we heard from President Trump. He announced this 15-point plan. He called it an historic agreement, saying that it was a monumental step towards lasting peace and security. It was a plan that had sequenced steps within it, that it was going to involve Israel ending attacks in Gaza, Hamas completely disarming, and the Israeli military pulling out of Gaza. There was a week of silence from Israeli leadership, and then the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu publicly rejected that peace plan, saying that they will not pull any military out of Gaza until Hamas has been completely disarmed. So this is why we are seeing this effort now to try and get past this stalemate. There is a complicating factor, though, and that is that there is Israeli elections in October, and Prime Minister Netanyahu is highly unlikely to give any significant concessions to this peace plan to Hamas before that election. He has a number of ministers in his far-right coalition pushing for him to not only reject this peace plan, but also to reoccupy Gaza and to resettle it with Jewish settlers. So he is under a lot of pressure internally, domestically, not to accept this peace plan at this point, but it will be interesting to see what, if anything, comes out of this meeting later today between Kushner and the Israeli Prime Minister. Paulo.
Yeah, we'll see if he feels the pressure coming from the White House in turn. Paula Hancock, thank you so much for that reporting. Let's go to political analyst now, Dalia Scheindlin, joining me from Tel Aviv. Dalia is also a fellow at the Century Foundation, as well as the author of The Crooked Temper of Democracy in Israel. Dalia, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Of course. So you heard some of the reporting from my colleague now, and many questions that are still unanswered about this series of meetings. Can you help me highlight the significance of these talks, about both Kushner's rare meeting with Hamas's leadership and his upcoming visit with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu? What could come out of this?
Well, we don't know what could come out of it because there's so much that involves kind of tension between the interests of the two sides, particularly Mr. Netanyahu and the American government. And Mr. Netanyahu, as your correspondent said, is under pressure not to show anything like withdrawal. And so the entire 15-point plan, as the original 20-point plan from October, hinges on a quid pro quo of Hamas disarmament and Israeli withdrawal from Gaza in general. course, there is no one-shot withdrawal. This will involve phases. Israel is currently officially holding up to what we call the yellow line, which is about 53% of Gaza, but has also expanded its effective control to what is sometimes called the orange line, which makes up about 67, nearly 70% control. And so I think that, the hardline government would like for there not to be any single withdrawal from any inch of all the area the IDF controls, and the American government would like to eventually reach the full 15-point and the original 20-point plan from last October. Between that and the fact that elections are coming, as your correspondent noted, I think the best we can expect will be that Israel will maybe make some sort of gesture that is frankly technical and very, very incremental, so that Netanyahu can try to satisfy the American government that he's showing some goodwill while not effectively really giving up Israel's very strong presence in Gaza. And I should just point out that the idea that this is going to lead to some sort of lasting effective peace is completely remote from a reality in which these agreements are partial, incremental, and focused only on Gaza for now. The long-term vision of Palestinian self-determination eventually in the form of a state that is mentioned in the 20-point plan from October is completely remote at this point. And I think that's the only thing that will eventually be something like Trump's hyperbole about long-term.
And you started answering my next question, which is the pressure that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu no doubt will feel from Washington. But that lingering question, which is, will it be enough for him to do more than just, as you point out, a sort of a symbolic gesture?
I mean, I don't, the responses of Trump are always somewhat unpredictable, but I think we do need to see this in the context of increasingly tense relations between Netanyahu and President Trump himself. This has been a very up and down relationship ever since President Trump took office again. Netanyahu is constantly on the defensive, trying to argue that this is a very good relationship, but Trump has, at points, both pressured him into actual diplomatic steps that he didn't want to take, such as this ceasefire deal that involves a withdrawal, and at times publicly berated him, not to mention forcing or essentially, coercing Israel into accepting ceasefires with Iran and with Lebanon, which Netanyahu didn't want either, and for the same reason. He's got the hardline government, he's got the hardline population, who thinks that there must be, a decisive victory in all of these areas where Israel has not managed to achieve it, and for all of those reasons, he is stuck in the polls ahead of the election. His coalition is doing poorly relative to the opposition parties, and that relationship with Trump might at one point have been a positive factor that he could use to boost his campaign. But in my analysis, at this point, the relationship is going badly enough, even if he tries to claim it's very good, that I don't think he stands to gain very much. And if the Trump administration or Trump himself does continue to pressure him, it might actually damage him in the elections, or at least prevent him from getting any late-stage boost that could help him possibly retake power, which is looking increasingly unlikely right now.
Understanding that we still haven't received an official readout from that Jared Kushner meeting over the weekend with the head of Hamas, hypothetically, if he is able to secure tangible commitments from that group that it will disarm and that it will relinquish governing authority, you think that could be enough for the Israelis to offer tangible commitments of their own?
I have to tell you, this is a bit of speculation, but in my analysis, you will not see that kind of response from the Netanyahu government that is currently in power ahead of the election. It could be the case if there is a future government run by the current opposition leaders or the main opposition competitor who is not in government just now, who's not in, his party is new. Gadi Eisenkot is leading the opposition now. If there is a government after the election formed by those current opposition parties, they could conceivably, respond in that way. But I do not expect the Netanyahu government to do this, because Netanyahu, I think, is against it himself, possibly, but more importantly, his entire coalition is so deeply committed to staying in Gaza. They say it at every opportunity that they expect to be holding on to Gaza, annexing, rebuilding settlements, very openly and repeatedly, including ministers from Mr. Netanyahu's party itself. This is not just what we call the hardline or extremist parties in government. So I do not see them doing anything that involves a real substantive commitment to long-term full withdrawal from Gaza before the elections.
Talit Shenlin, we have to leave it there, but great analysis. Thank you so much for your time, as always.
Thank you for having me.
Joint military exercises between the U.S. and South Korea kicked off today. This just hours after President Donald Trump ordered the Pentagon to substantially scale them back. In a social media post announcing the change, the president cited his positive relationship with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, saying that the drills send a signal that is, quote, inappropriate and hostile to North Korea. The president also cited Seoul's lack of assistance with Iran, saying that he recently asked South Korea's president if they'd like to join the, quote, denuclearization of Iran, and that they said no. Gage Golden is following developments from Hong Kong. Gage, the president packed a lot into that post on the Truth Social post. Help us unpack it and get a better understanding of how this potentially impacts some of these very important alliances.
Yeah, to understand that post, I think we have to go to yesterday's post. The president posted on Truth Social something very quick, just a photo of him, the North Korean leader. They were kind of with straight faces, and he said, look, despite this photo, we have a great relationship. And that kind of teed up the social media post today, where the president basically said that the operation, the exercise that's happening, Ochi Freedom Shield, is an annual summertime exercise between the South Korean military and the United States military based in South Korea. He's calling it hostile and inappropriate, and that we have a great relationship with North Korea, we as in the United States. And, this is an operation that the president is aware of. I'll go back to his first term in office. In 2018 and 2019, President Trump then scaled back the operation, mainly due to citing costs, and then it was also scaled back in 2020 and 21 due to COVID-19. So the president is familiar with this operation. What's interesting, though, Polo, you said there's a lot to unpack, and I think that's true because there's kind of 2 points here. There's the fact that, hey, the president's saying we have a great relationship with North Korea, we want to scale back this operation, and on the other hand, taking a little bit of jab at South Korea, saying, when we asked you for help in denuclearizing, Iran, the South Korean government said, no thanks. Now, in a statement to CNN, the Blue House, which is the official government agency, the head of the government there in South Korea, essentially said that that's not necessarily the case, that, they hope that this open communication between the leaders of North Korea and the U.S. will lead to, quote, meaningful talks between the two countries. And they went on to say that they are actually working to try to help kind of solve the problem, the ongoing conflict, if you will, in Iran and open the Strait of Hormuz. So they didn't necessarily take a jab back at the president because they are good allies, which also raises the question as to why exactly would the president do that. Now, it could just be trying to extend an olive branch to the North Koreans and trying to set up another summit because, again, going back to the president's first term, there was 3 different meetings. Actually, President Trump was the first president to ever step foot on North Korean soil. Fast forward to now, the second term, that hasn't been the case. And in the past, President Trump has extended invitations or interest, if you will, to try to meet with Kim Jong-un. That has been met with silence, crickets. So this could be an opportunity for that. Does that mean that he's looking for a diplomatic win? Possibly. But on the other hand, for the South Korean side, this could be the president saying, look, we asked you for help with Iran and you didn't. Our protection goes beyond the Korean Peninsula, and we need your help beyond the Korean Peninsula. However, with all of that said, the focus on that exercise, right? The South Korean government says that it actually started today, the 10-day operation started today as planned. So it's going to take some time to fully understand, one, are they actually reducing the amount of exercise that they're doing, and 2, what kind of fallout, if any, will happen on either side of the Korean Peninsula.
It was just months ago, President Trump was lambasting European allies for not getting involved in this conflict, so perhaps South Korea is next. Gage Golding, thank you so much for that reporting. And we are following breaking news from the entertainment world. Actress Hayden Panettiere has died at the age of 36. The actress and mother of one is best known for her roles in television and the science fiction show Heroes, and also the country music drama Nashville. While the circumstances surrounding her death remain unknown, Panettiere's father told CNN, quote, "She was an incredible light and force of nature who brought immeasurable love and joy to all who knew her, to the millions who watched her on screen."
Take it on, take it on,
moved away from Hawaii, but parts of the state are still seeing some heavy rain and strong wind gusts. Officials are saying that the most serious threat right now is flash flooding and mudslides, especially in some of the higher elevated areas. Lala made its closest approach to Hawaii's Big Island on Saturday as a Category 1 hurricane, and it left all of this devastation behind. Hawaii's governor says that at least 100 homes have been damaged or lost, and wind gusts toppled trees and knocked down utility power lines. The results? Some 165,000 customers now without power, and they've been warned that the outages could last a while. Officials are saying that the danger from the storm is far from over.
We still have a lot of rain. We have a lot of flooding. We have a lot of road closures. And we still have a lot of high winds. Although it's been recategorized to be a tropical storm, it's still on the upward level of the tropical storm with winds, in excess of about 70 miles an hour. The widespread power outages is creating, a lot of problems for a lot of our residents now. With the road closures also, people are, either having to take an alternate route or they're unable to get, to the destination that they need to get to. So we're urging everybody to stay home insofar as possible that they're able to.
Widespread heat alerts are in effect across parts of the U.S. as millions face triple-digit temperatures well above average. CNN meteorologist Allison Chinchard with your forecast.
Roughly 50 million people are under some type of alert across the U.S., with the bulk of it really focused right here along the southeastern portion of the country. Now, when we take a look at the heat index, that is the air temperature plus the humidity in these regions, this is what feels like temperature is expected to be. 105 in Atlanta on Monday, 109 in Jackson, 107 in Jacksonville, Florida. But again, even progressing into Tuesday, these numbers really don't drop off all that much, and in some cases, they actually go up a little bit. This is going to be a prolonged effect for many of these southern cities. Take Atlanta, for example. The average high this time of year is 89 degrees. They will spend every single one of the next 7 days at or above that marker, and even worse for a place like Dallas, where the average is 96. Every single one of the next 7 days, that temperature is expected to be in the triple digits.
Thanks, Allison. Still to come here on CNN Newsroom, a critical deadline in the U.S.-Iran conflict has expired with no wider peace deal in place. We'll have the very latest on that in a moment.
It is the biggest upset in sports history. It's what sport was all about.
Decades in Sports, next Sunday at 9 on CNN and next day on the CNN app.
Understanding between the U.S. and Iran, which gave the two countries a 60-day window to negotiate a permanent end to the war, would expire today. It seems that neither side is really in a hurry to get back to the negotiating table. Iran's foreign minister says that Tehran has not decided whether to resume talks with Washington, and Tehran's top negotiator has declared the U.S. and Israel have failed to achieve their goals. Meanwhile, the White House has made it clear that its current strategy is to inflict maximum economic pain on Iran. The U.S. Treasury Secretary has said that unprecedented economic measures against Iran could go into effect as early as this week. A.J. Heller joining me now from Cairo. He's a senior associate fellow at the Royal United Services Institute for Defense and Security Studies. A.J., it's always great to see you. Thank you so much for coming back.
Pleasure. Thank you. Always good to be on your show.
As we mentioned, AJ, and as you know well, that 60-day window that was agreed to in June, it's now expired. And the purpose of that was to try to sort out some of the more complicated issues in this conflict, to address those. How do you see, though, do you see any concrete advances the last 2 months from either side?
Well, yes and no, in the sense that there have been advances in discussions between the Iranians and the Omanis, and of course the Omanis are acting on behalf of the rest of the GCC and by extension the international community, not formally of course, but I think everybody understands it as such. But when it comes to discussions between Tehran and Washington, that's an entirely different proposition. And there are two major problems here. One is that both sides want to present themselves as having won, right? There's no sense here of either side feeling that they're in a losing position. The Iranians have their narrative about this, the Americans have theirs. And because they both feel that they're in pole position, they feel that the other side should compromise in order to reflect that. So that's one. The other is that both sides again see the waiting game as actually being something that works to their advantage. The Iranians, I think, see the midterms in the United States coming up in a relatively short period of time and figure that, okay, if this goes on for longer, then there's going to be a price that the Americans pay, and Trump in particular pays, for this war. I think, by the way, that's correct. I think that what is incorrect is thinking that it would mean that Trump would be in a more agreeable position following the midterms. Maybe he ought to be, but I don't think that's really how this White House operates. So the calculations and the assessments on both sides about the other side, I think, are quite skewed. Of course, within Washington, there's this constant idea that, well, if we just put more pressure on the Iranians, then they'll buckle. But the Iranians see this as an existential war. So no, they won't buckle. I don't think that's really how they're considering things. Maybe they should compromise, but it doesn't matter what they should do. It matters what we think that they actually will do and how they see the situation.
When the 60-day period expired a few hours ago, the first thing that came to my mind was a very simple question with a very complicated answer, which was, what now? Does this basically now mean yet another stalemate?
Well, yes and no. Again, I'm sorry. Yes, in the sense that if all other things stayed equal, then yes, I think it would be a new stalemate for the coming period. But I don't think that everything will stay equal, because of course it's not simply about negotiations between the Americans and the Iranians. There are other arenas within the broader conflict, if I can put it like that are constantly developing. Israel's occupation of southern Lebanon, for example, things could flare up there. Another area where I think people should really be paying a lot closer attention to, Yemen and the Houthis. And the ongoing escalations that at the moment haven't peaked, but I think people should really be watching on that side of the Arabian Peninsula with regards to Bab el-Mandeb, of course, but also within the country itself, considering that I think in Riyadh they see the situation as untenable. And of course this is against the backdrop of the Mecca Pact that was announced last week or so. So I don't think that everything is going to stay equal, and that's going to have ramifications, I think, for the Iranian-US file as well.
I want to really close with your thoughts on this news that we received not too long ago here. Iranian army now offering some $30,000 to individuals that either kill or capture U.S. service members. The messaging that Tehran is hoping to send Washington with such a move.
I don't find it to be particularly new, to be honest with you. I think that it's clear that these two countries are in a state of war with each other. I would see this as being simply a rhetorical sort of tool in that regard, and one that will be forgotten very, very quickly if there's actually progress in negotiations. But I wouldn't see it as consequential, quite frankly.
H.A. Hillier, always a pleasure getting your analysis. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care now.
Well, the commander of U.S. Central Command is pushing back after concerns about morale and mental health with USS Abraham Lincoln. And Brad Cooper visited that aircraft carrier over the weekend as part of a recent trip to the Middle East. The ship has been deployed for over 250 days now, being sent to the region to support U.S. operations in the Sangha. Admiral Cooper says that the USS Abraham Lincoln has among the lowest mental health cases out of the Navy's 11 active carriers. He went on to say, quote, "This doesn't mean that all is perfect. Find any of the nearly 4 million Navy veterans in America today, and they will likely tell you that service at sea for long periods isn't for everyone. It is very challenging and tough, and every single one of us, including me, reacts to stressors in different ways. But Russia still... Russia is currently assessing the damage following one of Ukraine's largest aerial attacks of the war so far. A mall in the Russian-controlled Donetsk region suffered extensive damage, which authorities have blamed on Ukraine. It's reportedly the third Russian mall to be hit this week alone. And this video is showing some smoke rising from a burning medical supplies warehouse near Moscow. The Kremlin says that it shot down more than 800 Ukrainian drones. 187 of those were said to have been intercepted in Moscow. Russia has also continued firing on Ukraine. President Zelensky says that Russia has launched more than 1,500 drones, 1,500 guided bombs, and 62 missiles in the past week. Kremlin's latest attack on Sunday in a book market and other sites. More on all of this, I'm joined by CNN's Sebastian Schubert is following the latest out of Berlin. Hey, Sebastian.
Good morning, Paolo. What we're seeing as these trades of airstrikes continue almost unabated every night is that just this last night, Paolo, we've seen Moscow and Kyiv trade attacks. Ukraine has attacked the Belgorod region. It's a neighboring region of Ukraine on the Russian side of the border, and equally Russia has attacked Sumy, a borderland region of Ukraine too. And unfortunately, in both of those situations, there have been fatalities as well as casualties. You alluded to that enormous attack, the largest ever, according to Russia, that was launched by the Ukrainians across Russia, but largely focused on Moscow. This is a phase of the war now that we have been in for considerable weeks, if not months, and it shows no signs of abating, because the way that this war is now developed, it is now being fought almost predominantly in the skies. The battlefields in eastern Ukraine have ground pretty much to a halt, and both sides have identified weaknesses in each other. That means that air attacks, like we've been seeing through ballistic missile attacks, through drone attacks, and through cruise missiles, is that these are the areas where they think they can inflict the most damage. The Ukrainians, who have developed enormously their drone capabilities, now have the opportunity and chances to be able to hit Russia where it really hurts. And we have seen the range of targets that they've been hitting. They've hit oil refineries, they've hit supermarkets, they've even been hitting warehouses of the Russian equivalent of Amazon, known as Wildberries, because what the Ukrainians say is that that company is supplying weapons or parts and components for the Russian war machine. The converse side of that is that Moscow has also identified that Kyiv and Ukraine have weaknesses, and those weaknesses are largely centered around Ukraine's ballistic, anti-ballistic missile capabilities, namely those Patriot missile interceptors, which are so depleted right now in Ukrainian stockpiles that they have to be sparing about where and when they use them. And the Ukrainian president has been calling for weeks now for an increase in those PAC-2, PAC-3 interceptor missiles, is what they're known in the military jargon, that they desperately need, but they are in such finite supply because they are only produced in the United States. And obviously producing a missile or an anti-ballistic missile like that is not something that you just roll out in the space of a few hours or even a few days. And what the Ukrainian president is calling for now, and I quote here, is that for the European allies and their Patriot missile systems and missiles not to sit idly in storage. These European allies, who are essentially now footing the bill for Ukraine when it is able to procure weapons, have to go through a mechanism that works with NATO called Pearl, which effectively procures missiles from the US. The European allies, they pay, and then they transfer them to Ukraine. The European allies do have these systems as well, but obviously they are slightly more reticent to give over their stockpiles for want of potentially needing them themselves, of this symbiotic balance that's going on here, Paolo. But what I think that we will not see is a real change in this air war. If anything, what we're likely to see is more continued attacks, and the fatalities will continue to rise, because largely there is no incentive here for Vladimir Putin to end this war yet. He shows no signs of doing so, and part of the way that the Europeans want to try to force him to the negotiating table, particularly as the White House and President Trump does not seem to be making any headway there, is the introduction of another sanctions package, which the Allies really believe, and the Europeans particularly firmly believe, will really start to clip the coffers of the Kremlin to be able to reduce their capabilities to procure money, which is then goes into funneling to buying weapons, paying military contracts, etc., etc. This sanctions package is due to be presented in the next few weeks, and hopefully then will be passed at the next European Council. But even then, that does not mean, Paolo, that we're going to immediately see Vladimir Putin saying, okay, you've got me on another sanctions package, I'm going to look to sue for peace. It shows at the moment, it does not feel that there is any reason, and there is certainly no sign of him looking to sue for any sort of peace.
It's been already over a month since President Trump surprised President Zelensky, telling him that he was willing to offer those licenses to the Ukrainians to manufacture. And here they are, still waiting. That's what you thank you so much for letting all that now. Democrats and Republicans in the U.S., they are eyeing the midterms, just weeks before early voting set to begin in some states. Both parties are focusing on. We're back.
The biggest upset in sports history.
It's until early voting begins in November's midterm elections. Georgia Senator Jon Ossoff, you see him here, he's one of them. He rallied in Atlanta on Sunday. Ossoff running for re-election, and he will be facing Republican conservative Mike Collins, who won the Republican primary runoff. Here is the Democratic senator's message to his supporters.
Many of you are here today because you just can't stand what's been done to our country. Our government made a tool of one man's vengeance, power, and wealth. Prices soar while the president rakes in billions. But in 8 weeks, Atlanta, in 8 weeks, we can cast our ballots and say enough is enough.
With me now is CNN senior political analyst Ron Brownstein. He's also a Bloomberg opinion columnist. Hey, Ron.
Hello, good to be with you.
It's great to have you with us. So in your latest piece that's available to subscribers on CNN.com, titled "Why the Middle of the Country is Back in the Center of American Politics," you write that the Republican Party is losing at least some of its grip on the middle of the country, specifically in some of those states that moved to solid red after the Obama era. States like Ohio, Iowa, among them. How much of that is voters growing increasingly frustrated with what they were promised back in 2024 during the campaign versus what they're getting today?
Yeah, really the middle of the country is where some of the sharpest movement away from Democrats and toward Republicans have been since Obama's presidency. I mean, when Obama came in, it's hard for people to imagine today. I mean, Democrats had senators in South Dakota, in North Dakota, in Iowa, in Nebraska. He won Ohio and Iowa twice. Obviously, all of those places have moved very much toward Republicans, really around kind of the interrelated actions of two core constituencies, white voters without a college degree who are half or more of the electorate in all of the states that we talked about, I just mentioned, and several more across the region, as well as rural residents who are more plentiful in these places as well. Now there is an opportunity for Democrats. Trump, mostly because of the economy. I mean, Trump's approval among working class whites, as we talked about before, he won about 2/3 of them in all three of his races. Now he's down to about 50-50 approval among them, and below that in some of these states. And then in rural areas, the combination of the tariffs and the impact that's had on overseas markets for American agricultural products, products, as well as higher fuel costs, which also translate into higher fertilizer costs, give the opportunity to Democrats to lose by less. I mean, they're not going to win those places. They're not going to win working class white voters. But if they lose them by less, their strengths among other groups in the area, particularly college-educated whites and minorities, are allowing them to put many of these places back in play.
So overall, how do you think this translates to increased competitiveness in some key Senate and governor's races?
Yeah, I mean, look, you could see the return of the Heartland Democrats this year, I think, without doubt. I mean, Democrats are seriously competing for the governor's mansions in Ohio and Iowa, which they haven't won either of those since 2006, with Amy Acton in Ohio and Rob Sand, who is now the favorite, I think, in Ohio, in Iowa, as well as the Senate races in both states, where Sherrod Brown has been leading in polls in Ohio. It's more of an uphill climb in Iowa, and there are even long shot chances, I think, for Democrats in Kansas and Nebraska. I mean, obviously, those are much tougher states for Democrats, but they are on the map this year in a way they have not. And it's not only in these governor and Senate races. There are 3 competitive House races in Iowa, 3 in Michigan, 4 in Pennsylvania, 1 in Nebraska, 1 to 2 in Wisconsin. I mean, this region really is at the fulcrum of the 2026 election. And, you know, you can look at this from the other side of the lens, which is that if Democrats can't make some breakthroughs, if they can't regain some ground in this area, in this year when Trump's approval has skidded so much and there are so many openings with groups that have leaned right, you have to ask yourself, is this really swing terrain? Because if Democrats can't, I think, reestablish a beachhead, kind of a mixed metaphor, in this landlocked part of the country, but if they can't establish a beachhead this year, when are they going to do it?
Because the reality is, it won't be easy for the Democratic Party, right, to make some of those inroads in those states. And in your piece, you specifically write that the party still faces substantial skepticism from many Heartland voters, especially on cultural issues. Maybe you can expand on that, and then also just tell us, how do Democrats actually capitalize on this with growing discontent in the middle of the country?
Yeah, I mean, look, as I said, it's kind of hard to imagine that back in the Obama era, which was only 15, 20 years ago, Democrats were winning 45% of working class white voters in these states, and that's what allowed them to get over the top with their strength with other groups. And, you had a combination of factors. Since then, Trump has appealed more directly, I think, to anxieties about demographic and cultural change, racial resentments. He has moved these places from competitive, in many cases, to deeply red. And really, it's almost a question of long-term versus short-term. I mean, I don't think the Democrats are any more acceptable culturally to many of the voters in places like Ohio and Iowa and Kansas and Nebraska, but they are feeling an immediate economic pain. And so the question is really, can Democrats get enough of them to focus less on their long-term concerns about whether the Democratic Party reflects their values and more on their short-term belief that Trump has not done enough to protect their interests?
Highly encourage all of our viewers to go to CNN.com and read that piece for themselves. Ron Brownstein, thank you so much for your time and analysis as always.
Thanks for having me.
And still to come, the Esports World Cup chess champion defends his title for a second year in a row. Chess Grandmaster Magnus Carlsen speaks with CNN about the future of the game's digital medium.
The finest luxury fragrances are now exclusively available at your local store. Unstoppable's Unlimited collection makes everything smell like heat. Luxury laundry scent beads so you can smell unstoppable.
After my accident, I couldn't quite do things like I used to. And my dad introduced Boost to me. I love the support, and when I got into martial arts, we got in it together. A real fight deserves a real boost.
My little girl loves wearing princess dresses almost every day. Irma has high-risk neuroblastoma. It was really hard to see our sunny, bright little girl hurting. St. Jude touches the lives of so many kids. And so even though her prognosis is still scary, we have a lot of hope.
Every minute matters for the children at St. Jude. They need your help. Please call, go online, or scan the QR code right now and give $19 a month to make a difference.
When your kid has cancer, just the stress and just the worry is definitely the hardest part. And seeing my wife's heart broken.
He's a healthy little boy running around, out playing all the time. Childhood cancer is absolutely crushing. What is coming in these walls every day as he fights for the battle of his life.
The search for cure must continue. Join your credit or debit card for $19 a month, and we'll send you this St. Jude t-shirt. You can proudly wear to show your support.
The donations and the research is saving her daughter's life. St. Jude may lift you and carry you on the days that you can.
They give us lots of love and made me feel like I had two homes, kinda. St. Jude and my home.
You can make a difference. Become a partner in hope today. Please donate now.
You've spent a lifetime opening doors. Now, one opens for you. Once Weekly Zepbound helps adults with obesity lose weight and keep it off. And now, it's open to you through Medicare GLP-1 Bridge for no more than $50 a month. People taking Zepbound lost up to 48 pounds.
Don't share needles or pens or reuse needles. Don't take if allergic to it or if you or someone in your family had MTC or MEN2. Tell your doctor if you get a lump or swelling in your neck. Stop Zepbound and call your doctor if you have severe stomach pain or a serious allergic reaction. Severe side effects may include inflamed pancreas or gallbladder problems. Tell your doctor if you experience vision changes before scheduled procedures with anesthesia. If you're nursing, pregnant, plan to be, or taking birth control pills. Taking Zepbound with the sulfonylurea or insulin may cause low blood sugar. Side effects include nausea, diarrhea, and vomiting, which can cause dehydration and worsen kidney problems.
Ask your doctor about Zepbound.
Closed captioning brought to you by Rue La La. Score today's top brands up to 70% off.
At Rue La La, you never pay full price. Seize the deals on top names before they're gone. Shop RueLaLa.com today.
Chess Grand